Hello, everyone, and welcome to this debrief of the second episode of Win This Together. The focus of the second episode of this webinar was on preparing your client for a mediation. And joining me today is Juin Nag, who is a colleague of mine at CAMP. Oh, sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jonathan Rodriguez, also a mediator at CAMP. And if Juin and me had a talk show, we probably would have called it Juin and Jonathan. And something else to go along with that. Coming back to the topic about preparing your client for a mediation, we had a fantastic webinar and there were a lot of questions in the Q&A box. However, we decided to really shorten it and just address two of these questions. And it came down to how do you prepare your client about choosing or appointing a mediator, one, and secondly, what is this value of the mediator that that you have to explain to your client while you're preparing for that session. So one of the major questions and was very elaborately actually discussed by the panelist was, how do you appoint this mediator? How do you choose this? Do the parties have a choice? Is there party autonomy in choosing the mediator? Absolutely. So for pre-litigation mediation, for private, professional, commercial mediation that CAMP engages in, you have a panel of mediators from which you can choose. You can find out their background, their experience, their education, their qualifications, their certifications, their accreditations, and accordingly you can choose the mediator. Recently we have begun to actually allow the participants, allow clients and their lawyers to actually have kind of a meet and greet with the mediator where they get to know the mediator a bit more. So you can actually do a proper research on your mediator before appointing a mediator. Now, what happens is that what happens if you change your mind about the mediator? Can you change your mediator? Of course you can. You'll have to reach out to the case manager, let the case manager know in confidence what the problem is. And the case manager might be able to help you actually communicate better your concerns with the mediator itself. But if you really are concerned and you want to change the mediator, you can. And whatever conversations you've had with the previous mediator, remain confidential. That confidentiality does not go away. Now, what happens with court and next mediation? Say the court refers a mediation to a court-referred mediator. And if you're not happy with it, you can always reach out back to the court and say that you want your mediator replaced. You can also say that I would prefer going to a private mediation center. And then the court will, of course, grant you that opportunity to go and engage a private mediation center. So party autonomy, yes, is very, very important. And it starts right from the stage of choosing a mediator. So that was a great question. And we owe it to the person who asked us that. All right, moving on to another very interesting question that was posed is, during this preparation stage where you and your client are working together to prepare for that mediation session, your client might start realizing that there are so many of these things or these negotiations, this conversation that you and your client could have done together. And suddenly, why are we bringing this neutral third party into the room? So Juin, this one's to you, and if you can address this about how do you actually address this with your client? How do you put out that value of the mediator to your client and make them understand what's the role of the neutral in that setting?
Thank you, Jonathan. And I think it's a critical question to ask, and I'm sure it plagues the mind of many parties and their advocates during the preparatory stage as to what is the value of the mediator. And, before I respond to that question, and not to sound audacious, I would just like to highlight that there are many disputes, where the parties would be able to resolve the dispute even before going to the lawyer, or, the party along with their lawyers can sit across the table and have a settlement. Having said that, there would be that set of intractable disputes where the mediation advocate during the preparatory stage identifies the need of a neutral. And in those disputes, it is the mediation advocate to probably speak to the client to highlight what is the value that the mediator gets to the table. And if I were to look at the entire journey of mediation, I would think that the mediator may be used to re-establish communication channels, to identify and get the right stakeholders to the table, to help parties understand what each other's interests are, to appreciate the other person's perspective, And finally, to explore the creative solutions to the problem at hand and coming up with that sustainable solution which leads to the settlement agreement and final settlement of the dispute at hand. And a good mediation advocate would be able to harness the powers of the mediator from the first meeting, at the mediation table until the settlement agreement, so that the dispute is settled amicably and sustainably. And therefore, it is not to say that every dispute will be mediated by a mediator, but there will be that set of disputes which need the intervention of a good, skillful mediator. I hope that answers the question, Jonathan.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Julian. And I think it's a very relevant question because suddenly you're bringing a different person into the picture, right? Your client has just confided the entire case with you, and something that's very confidential has been shared with you. And now suddenly you're bringing in a neutral to the room. And as much as you can provide your client with her or his biodata and CV and experience, but it's still another person in the room. And it's very important for your client to trust the mediator just like you do. So appointing a mediator is important, but also realizing the value of that person in the room is crucial to having a great mediation. So thank you for those questions, and catch our next session on September 9th at 6:30 p.m. IST. Thank you, Julian, for joining us today.